Good morning, everyone. Pastor George here for this episode of A New Thing. It's a great day. The Mets beat the Dodgers last night, taking the series. Feel good. And now it's time to talk about how we use technology. So, first things first is we're going to look at this passage from the Bible, John 20. This is a passage that's often used to talk about faith, and we'll see why. I'm sure you know this, but that's actually not the point of what we're talking about today. So here it says, we're going to read the appearance of the disciples and then Jesus and Thomas. So it says, on the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you will withhold forgiveness from any, it is withheld." Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my fingers into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." So, obviously, this is often used to talk about faith, but that's not what I want to use it today to talk about, although that's important. What I want to use this to talk about today is this and this: zombies and ghosts. Ghosts and zombies. That's what I want to talk about today. And so the question is, what is a zombie, right? Well, zombie is obviously a thing from horror fiction, right? But it is a body that has been reanimated. So it's a dead body that's died and been reanimated, but there is no soul in a body, right? It's just kind of animated and walking around either through magic or through biology, like a virus or something that's really popular in a lot of zombie fiction, right? And so, what is the opposite of that? Well, the opposite of that is this. In case that last picture really scared you, I got like one of the classic bedsheet here, so you don't get too scared. Here, right? What is a ghost? A ghost is a spirit or a soul without a body. And so the question is, after Jesus raises from the dead, what is he? Is he a ghost or is he a zombie? Well, the answer is neither, right? And you can see this in this passage. So, first of all, it seems as though Jesus has some ghost like qualities. You can see here that the door is locked. No one's coming in. They're scared. They're inside. And Jesus appears before them. Right? How this happens, we're not quite sure. But we could say he goes through the wall. Classic ghost thing to do, right? He appears in the midst of them. Even though even though it's locked, he somehow gets in there. But is he a ghost entirely? Right? Is he just a spirit? Some heretical Christian groups have thought this, like the Gnostics. They believed he was completely a spirit at this point. But that's not the case, right? He shows them what? He shows them his hands and his side. And you could say at this point, well, it's just a spirit showing him his things, right? But what does he tell Thomas to do when they meet later? He says, "Put your finger here and put your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Right? So he has flesh that you're able to interact with. So it is a body, right? And we see later in John, just if you keep reading through this, we see Jesus eat, right? He eats with the disciples on the beach. So is he a zombie? No, right? He has a soul. He's not just a corpse walking around without any sort of sentience or anything like that, right? Is he a ghost? No, right? He has a body. He's enfleshed still. And this is something that Christians, by the way, this is often misunderstood by so many people, right? We think we die, we leave our body, we go to heaven, and that's the best, right? No, that's not it, right? The Christian religion has, and the Bible has, a very high view of the body, right? The body is not discarded. The body is remade by God in this new spiritual flesh, as Paul talks about in his letters, right? That's what's going to happen at the end of time. And so the body is not a shell to be discarded, or to be gotten rid of, right? It's an important part of what makes us human. Without a body, we are ghosts. With a body only, detached from the world in another place, we become a zombie, right? So this isn't my own distinction, just to let you know. I was reading this book recently. It's this book, The Artifice of Intelligence, The Divine and Human Relationship in a Robotic Age. It's a really good theology book. I found it actually very readable, just in case anyone had ever wanted to read it. But this is by a lady called Noreen Hertzfeld. She's a theologian and a computer scientist, which is pretty cool. And the majority of this is about, like, how do we view artificial intelligence and AI and robotic stuff in a Christian theological lens, especially with it. And she uses this distinction to talk about why AI can never really be sentient or have a soul in the way a human can, right? Because it's detached from reality completely, right? It's a ghost. Even if it were to have a body like the one you see at on the cover there, right? Kind of like a robot body. It still is not a body, right? It's a shell that contains what it needs to, but doesn't actually have the qualities of a normal body, right? She goes way more in depth into this. That's not what I'm talking about today. We're not talking about whether AI can be sentient. I've given my thoughts on AI before. I'm willing to talk about it another time, but I just wanted to cite my source, right? That's where I got this from. All right, I loved her distinction of the zombie and the ghost, because she uses it mostly to talk about this, and she makes an offhand comment about humanity. But I want to focus on the fact that I actually think we see this in our day-to-day life, right? So, like, I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound dismissive, but I'm trying not to be. So just give me the benefit of the doubt. But oftentimes, right, as a younger person, I know that, like, young people wouldn't consider me young because I'm 30, and I might as well be 80. But as a younger person, I often hear older people complain about how much younger people are on their phones or use technology, right? And oftentimes what they'll say is that they're zombies. And I actually want to affirm that for a second before I critique it. So I actually think that is true, right? Because let's just use phones as an example, right? What do phones allow us to do? Well, they bring us to other places, interacting with other people. And because they're such dopamine hits and we enjoy interacting them with so much, we leave our body and we, not in the literal sense of our spirits depart, right? But in terms of our actual lived reality, we turn the world off around us and we enter into our phone. And this is kind of like where the phenomenon of the iPad kid comes from, right? They're these kids that really struggle with interpersonal relationships because they've spent so much time on screens that they can't really hold conversations with people who are outside of those things, right? Or they retreat into their phone as soon as things become boring for them. So I want to affirm that. What I want to say in response as well, though, is that it's not just them. It's actually all age groups are very likely, just by the way that our world is set up now, to retreat into screens and become zombies. And if you don't believe me, right, here's some data, okay? I'm not saying this is the be-all, end-all, but this is from the UK. I think this easily tracks in the United States, right? Here you can see that the age group, male, female, how many hours a day they spend on screens. Of course, the younger they are, the more it is. But let's not really pretend, okay? Let's not pretend that in terms of functionality or life, the way that I see it, right, that there's that much of a difference between 7 hours and 5 hours. To me, there really isn't. Like, yes, this is more, but look how much time you're actually still spending looking at the screen. You compare that with like 3 decades ago, it's nowhere close to this much in any of these categories, my guess, right? Actually, I guess we had TV, so maybe there actually was pretty high at the same time, right? The screens change, the concepts don't, right? So this is still a lot of time to be spending on screens, um, and all of us at all times are very tempted to be zombies. And of course, I see a lot of you on your phones, and I see you on Facebook. Okay, I'm not blind. You can't escape. None of us can really. All right, it's part of our lives these days. So we're very tempted to become zombies. But the thing is our bodies are here, but as I said, our minds are elsewhere. And this is the really scary, not too scary, but the scary thing about online relationships is, who are we interacting with? Yes, we know we're interacting with people, right? We know that when we maybe like a video of our favorite YouTube creator, or comment on something on a post or something like that, like, we know we're interacting with other bodies out there, other humans, right? But how are we interacting with them? And well, we're interacting with them as ghosts, right? They're disembodied, we're disembodied, we're in this other place, completely unrelated to each other, have no relationship. And I know that there are people, I know there are people who have relationships with people online, in the sense of like, friendship and things like that. I get that, but I would push very much that the idea that just because you're friendly with someone online doesn't mean that you actually have like a community or relationship to them. This is the really odd thing, right? There are all these communities online, right? Um, Problem with them is that they turn on each other very quickly, because they're not actually embodied and with each other. I'm not saying that embodied communities never turn on each other. Of course they do. But there's a big difference between sitting and being in the same room with someone and talking with them and disagreeing and having that thing, than online, where it's a ghost and you're a ghost, and there's really no stakes at all in the thing. Like, sure, feelings might be hurt, you might get mad, you might rage, whatever, right? But it's the ultimate epitome of kind of like a community without actual community. I think the pandemic taught us this wonderfully, right? I mean, I think everyone thought that that was going to be the moment that we would be able to kind of really move beyond this. But a few years out, we realized, and I think during it, we realized how much actual contact with other people matter in terms of community, right? So this is how we interact, right? We become zombies as we're sucked into our phones or our screens, whatever you want to call it, and we become ghosts when we're in them, because we're interacting in a world that's just transient and not, we can't touch, or it can't touch us, right? And so I think it's really important that Jesus became embodied. Of course, like, Christianity isn't the only religion that says like gods can take on flesh, but this is usually a temporary thing. You think of like the Greek gods, and they kind of have bodies, but they're not really like humans, and they can turn it on and off when they want, right? One of the important things about the Christian claim is that Jesus came down and became human, right? This is in our creeds. And what that means is that he was self-limiting himself, right? He limited himself to a body. When you couldn't, in the first century, right? Of course, he's God; he can do anything he needs to, but he limits himself in the humility of taking on the flesh, right? So if you're with Jesus and you're walking around with him, you're Peter, you're walking around him in the first century. Is Jesus there and also in, I don't know, Japan? No, right? He's just there with you. That's the point of being a body, is that you're stuck in one place, right? And that happens. And so, while Jesus's spirit can be in many places, right, through the Holy Spirit and in the Godhead, Jesus is actually in flesh, right? He's at a certain place at a certain time. And so this is important because it actually teaches us that the body matters a lot, because God takes one on. It's considered a whole human being with both body and soul, not with one over the other, right? And what happens is, if we reject these things, like some people are trying to do, right? So like some kind of like sciencey guys, scientific materialists guys. A lot of them, tech bros in San Francisco or whatever, like are all hoping that they'll be able to upload their consciousness to the cloud, right, and get robot bodies of plastic so they can live forever. That's the hope. But that's not an existence that we would actually recognize as being human in any way, right? We hope it is. That's what the science fiction, emphasis on the fiction, tells us that it will be, right? Or we hope that it will be through our fiction. But there's no reason to think that that is actually going to be the case, right? And like sad stories happen when we forget this. So this happened last year, but this came up recently in a podcast I was talking about. But you'll see this, right? This is where an AI chatbot pushed a teen to kill himself, right? Good thing I don't have any YouTube thing, or I wouldn't be able to talk about this. And it's really sad, right? 14 years old. He was talking with an AI chatbot who was pretending to be a character from Game of Thrones, and they fell in love, right? He fell in love with her, and the whole belief was that maybe if he killed himself, then he would end up with her in the afterlife or whatever, right? Really sad. Obviously, there's also probably mental things going on here. The family's suing. I'm not really going to comment on that. The point is, though, is that when this happens, when this type of stuff happens, this is when you're a zombie and a ghost, right? He was completely detached from his community, his family, his life, and he was sucked into an online fake, just ghost relationship with an algorithm, right? Zeros and ones, which is crazy and sad, right? Of course. But important for us to remember, because this is the good news that we get to bring into the world, right? We get to bring in good news that scares a lot of people, right? And it scares people. Why? Because bodies deteriorate and die. So to in an age where people are desperately looking for technology to stifle that, we come in and we get to break the illusion. And doesn't sound like a fun thing, but I'm telling you, like once you understand that, your life the burden on you is so much lighter. When you understand that that you are not just trapped, right, and that this body isn't meant to be a prison, and the soul is not any more important than the thing that it contains. That God cares about both because He takes on flesh and is both, right? Has both in the person of the Son. That means that your life and your existence is loved and treasured by God. And that's really important to remember, right? It's not something to be escaped. It's something to be enjoyed, right? The pleasures of this life are to be enjoyed, and of the body are to be enjoyed, right? It's good. Right? Jesus eats, and that's good, right? That's a good thing. We should enjoy that. We shouldn't desire a world where, oh, maybe we live forever, which isn't possible. Everything is finite this side of the resurrection, and then but we're stuck in plastic bodies or something, right? Or we've uploaded our consciousness to the cloud, whatever you want to say, right? But at the same time, with that, right, what does that also call us to do? It also calls us to be recognized of the people around us, and that we live in a community. And that means that we have to be logged in here, not somewhere else, when we're paying attention to other people. It's not saying that technology is bad. Phones are great. Social media, whatever. But a lot of technology is good, but we have to remember that it gives us a false confidence that we are part of something when we're really not in any real sense. And we have to be logged into the people around us, present, embodied with them in our community. And really, that is the big challenge that all of us face when it comes to using this stuff, because it feels good to use your phone, right? It feels good to, like log onto a video game and not have to talk to anyone, right? It feels good to zone out when a conversation maybe isn't most important to you, or think about something that is, or whatever else, right? But that's not what we're called to do. We're called to be in the place where we are, just as Jesus was in the place where He was, living and loving alongside these people that He was around, right? Who weren't perfect by any means. And so I just want to remind you of that, right? That that is what I want you to do. I want you to think differently about technology. I think the Bible calls us to think differently about it, and not to be a zombie and not to be a ghost, but to be an embodied soul living amongst other embodied souls and loving them as Jesus wants us to. All right, that's what I wanted to talk about today. I hope you guys had a wonderful rest of your Thursday. You haven't had it yet. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and I'll see you in 2 weeks basically when I get back from vacation. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace out.